Hey, welcome everyone. So we've got another great GoHire Talks conversation going on today. I'm really excited to talk to Jeff Pohl here. And Jeff is the CEO of Warden AI, and they do compliance, and he'll give you all the details. But as we've been talking about AI and HR, and I've been talking on webinars about it, and I think we're up to now 600 CHROs and VPs and directors on the webinars. And it all comes down to compliance and legal and at least understanding the risk across the enterprise. So I wanted to get Jeff on, talk about that. So Jeff, give us the intro about yourself, and then we'll jump in about the company in a little bit.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on the show, Jonathan. So yeah, I'm Jeff Pohl, co-founder and CEO of Warden AI. My background is originally as an engineer, building AI systems in regulated industries and in regulation technology. And now that was done before I founded Warden. And what we do at a high level is we audit and certify that AI systems used in HR and TA tech specifically are fair and compliant and trustworthy to use. So that's the space we're in.
Now, how would you define, just to get a little bit deeper, fair and compliant? Because we know even in the last 2 weeks, the Workday Mobley case has come up, which many people on the show probably know about, but essentially it's AI was being used supposedly by Workday, and a 40-year-old older male was rejected automatically from several solutions. So they created a class action lawsuit, and it's in process. It'll take a long time, but the idea is the ATS is now on the hook for a solution that they implemented for their clients, and chances are the client didn't even know what was going on.
That's a super important case for sure. And I'm at the first time that we're seeing that it's not just the employer who may or may not use an AI tool that would be on the hook for a potential discrimination claim, but actually the vendor powering that. So that's really interesting in this case, whatever the outcome is in the end.
Yeah, and I watch a lot of podcasts in our space. I don't know that a lot of people have talked about it with someone like you, not necessarily specifically about Mobley, but what are the risks? Like, how does this stuff happen? Where both the vendors that are going to watch, as well as the CHROs and the CIOs and the CFOs, how do they protect themselves from these types of things? And then we'll define the things we're trying to protect them from.
Yeah, so big topic. And with fairness, with before AI, with human-based processes, recruitment, hiring, etc., it's always been a thing that's difficult to prove or disprove either way. And one of the interesting things with AI is that it gets, I would say it's easier because you can measure machines in a more systematic way. However, actually measuring with a complete kind of certainty and conclusiveness how an AI system behaves and is or is not biased is still a tricky thing to do. But fundamentally, you can measure that. And we're not at the stage in the Workday case of having that kind of level of evidence brought to bear in the case. It's still quite early to get to that. That is the crux of the issue. And part of what we do at Warden is, as a third party, using technology, using real data sets that we have, actually measure and evaluate using different techniques the extent to which there may not be bias inside the AI itself, and the way that it's actually ranking candidate, making recommendations, or whatever the process is. And so that's very new space. But that evaluation can give people confidence to deploy a model in the first place, or to use one, or to defend ultimately against maybe a potential claim down the line that the system is not fair. Here's some basically mathematical statistical evidence we have of how we evaluated our AI system before we started using it and why we believe it's safe and fair.
Yeah, there was a post from oh my gosh, I'm going to forget this. I will put it in the notes for everyone. Oh, Martin Redstone out of the UK. Martin did a post on LinkedIn in this last week about, and he's a lot more technical. I don't know Martin personally, but he's more technical than I actually knew. And he did one of the questions that HR teams have asked me in the past is, how do we use like ChatGPT to score resumes or to help us understand which candidates to hire, type of thing? And there's a lot of tools out there in the market that will say, yes, hey, we'll score candidates for you and things. Some fully automated stuff, some we've had it in applicant tracking systems in the past that parse resumes and score things, but they don't make decisions and things like that. And then, so HR manager asking, hey, how can I upload resumes and find out of the 100 candidates that applied, which ones to go through? And Martin did this research to say, what's actually happening with these large language models? If I take a set of 100, I think it was 100 resumes, he put them all up, I think it was for an HR business partner, put them all up against the same job description and used, I think, 2 or 3 different models, maybe more, large language models. And he came back and said, use the exact same prompt, or you sometimes have to make them a little bit different depending on the model. Uploaded the resumes and said, which ones should I look at and not look at? And he basically just said, all these language models do absolutely no good at this. They said 55% of the candidates never surfaced in any of the models, so were completely ignored. And then I think it was less than 15% or something like that. And I'll put in the show notes, I'll link to Martin's actual research on this, but only 15% of the candidates even showed up in more than 2. So they all used different models. And this is the best that we've got, right? Now, they're not trained for recruiting specifically. This is what HR is using in many cases because they don't have a specific tool. So they're assuming, hey, if I put this thing up there, it's going to be able to read all these things and give me back info. But it's not. The data shows that it's actually worse than a human doing it, although much faster.
Interesting. Yeah. No, so Martin's great. I do know him personally. I haven't caught up with that particular bit of research, but his narrative on HRT people kind of casually using ChatGPT for high risk use cases like that, like ranking candidates, is valid, that people shouldn't casually use that. However, to kind of give a slightly counterpoint, particularly if the comment there is on the fairness side, the bias side, that all these models are and can be demonstrated and proven to be biased, at least in certain circumstances.
Yep.
And for example, if, as Martin may have done that example, if you ask a LLM to rank, and if you include information, things like names and things that it could, use to get proxies for someone's sex or gender, for example, then that is a common way that you can get it to be somewhat biased. However, I will say, in defense of actual AI technology vendors out there properly built, even if they're powered by a similar model underneath the hood, they're not built in such a naive way. So they never say, or at least most of them, if they're properly built, won't just be like, here's all the people, go and rank them. They'll take one at a time, remove name and all the PII, and say, here's the job description, what score or how good a fit is this particular person, and the exact same question to all the others. And when you do it like that, again, bias is still a risk, and it's important to measure it and evaluate it and protect against it. But actually, we have data that shows that it's often unbiased, in fact, less biased in many cases than a traditional human would be in recruitment, which we all know is not the highest bar. So yeah, double-edged sword, I suppose, is the message here on.
Well, that's super helpful to me. I talk about this stuff all the time, and I didn't know, and this is why I wanted you on the show. You're deep in understanding what the vendors are offering and how they're going about these searches. And I don't think probably most sales teams at vendors are talking about how it works, because they're not technical people generally, unless it's the founder doing sales. So I think this critical point is that many of these vendors, and this is why you should look at a tool like Jeff's as you're considering tools to purchase, is how are they taking out bias? Are they doing, as Jeff said, taking out name, taking identifiable PII type of info that might even be a historically Black college? That would probably say they're probably African American of sort, right? There's ways that as a vendor or as a client, you want to make sure that DE&I, and regardless of the political statement in the US right now, it is still illegal to hire based on race and things like that. So I think everyone's still cognizant of that, but I'm glad to hear that the vendors are doing that, and that's something that you are looking for when you're advising and trying to certify these guys.
Exactly, yeah. So the risks are real, but I think one of the messages I always try and share is not to run away in fear just because there are some risks, right? All great opportunities come with risk. So the opportunity of using AI, even in high risk scenarios like a screening process, is still worth exploring at least. And there are things you can do as a company building an AI solution, like a vendors, like I described. And if you're buying one and deploying it or evaluating it in procurement, there are also things you can do to mitigate. For example, you can ask vendors if they have bias audits done internally, or even better, externally by third parties. You can ask to understand more about how the system works, what inputs can be used, whether it's that might mean that there's a potential for bias or not, as we just discussed. And like I said, the data that we have suggests that in many cases, AI systems are more fair than humans, though not always, still a real risk to worry about, but not one to be a fundamental reason not to use an AI system. Once basically the good one to do it right might actually improve on the status quo that we have today. We all know that people looking at a resume, thousands of them, there's so many, you can't look at them all. You're tired, hungry, you've got your unconscious biases, some people have conscious biases. That's very flawed starting point. And AI is in many cases can improve upon that. Just important to ask the questions and do the due diligence and put in place the safeguards to make sure it's safe and fair and compliant.
So what are some of maybe like top three, you mentioned a couple, top 3 or 4 questions that someone who's interested in buying these, and it could be an SMB, it could be a director of HR who needs to, as well as someone obviously on the talent space. What are 3 to 5 questions, the most important ones they should come up with?
Yeah, certainly, if not exact questions, the things I would recommend to think about and evaluate. The first one is actually, I would call efficacy, or like effectiveness, usefulness of the system, to actually helpful, doing a good or better job than the people who would otherwise be doing it themselves with the AI technology. That's important. I'd also ask about data protection, data privacy, security, all that stuff that we've got pretty good at with software buying generally, and AI also has those risks. So that's one to ask about. Perhaps not get as fixated as some people do. I find that the data security side of things can almost block. I almost feel we as a society put too much focus on that risk and slow things down when it's not actually as big a risk as people think. Personal opinion, but should definitely be asked about. Then there's compliance, right? To what extent is this AI system compliant with existing regulations? We've got you mentioned DEI. We've got long-standing civil rights regulations about discrimination that need to be honored. And then there's the new AI regulations. New York City has a law. EU's got one signed coming. Colorado signed one. TBD on some of the other states and what happens at the federal level. And then the last one would be on this bias question we just covered, of asking how they handle that, how they mitigate it. Do they have third-party audits? These are sorts of questions that can help
and then
get confidence.
And the primary legal questions that are coming up, like with, what is it, 144 in New York? I think that's what it is. If you don't have AI make the decision, so if there's a human in the loop, you're much farther off. Like, you're automatically going to be a lot safer than automatically sending rejection notifications that some vendor might have in there because they don't know any of this stuff, because it's pretty cool and they just built it last night and they sold it to you. So it's there. You always have to have a human in the middle to be compliant, if you think about it that way, but there's other things involved too.
Yeah, no, that's a good summary. A slight kind of add into that is, and all these regulations are a bit open interpretation over what automation truly means. Like, how much do you have to automate or to be in the remit of the regulation? The New York law is focused on automated employment decisions. And then it doesn't say you can't do them. It just says if you do, there's certain things to comply with. In particular, a bias audit external by a third party is required, which should be published online, and that should be required by the employers using the tool, not just the vendor providing it.
Got it. Great.
And so that's on that front. And but it's a gray area of, if it's not fully automated, and most people are not, Workday, for example, cases they've said it wasn't fully automated and up to the employers to configure it, then you're in the gray area. That what we're seeing is increasingly becoming, people are leaning towards the kind of correct and more compliant side of the gray area, even if there's interpretation. And this Workday case we keep talking about, of course, is nudging that further in the direction, because people realize the risks are real, and so they need to get their compliance and risk mitigation in order. Yeah.
So say if someone's using an applicant tracking system, or I guess there's kind of 2 models now, or maybe more, but you've got everything from video interviewing, you've got resume parsing within the ATS, and then you've got all-in-one candidate application automated recruiter. I'll ask you about the last one, because when we met at Unleash, there was everyone selling these agentic this, that, and the other, and then a recruiter in a box that does everything. What should people be thinking about when they find one of these? It may look great and it may work for them, but what are the concerns they should have about all-in-one recruiter, if you will?
Yeah. So my view on the agentic AI thing is maybe a little bit negative. I do think it's mostly a rebrand of a bit of automation or an AI workflow in a targeted way, and just call it an agent. And actually, the word agent is quite a good one.
Yeah.
Generally, if this is doing a task that a person might have done, texting people, scheduling an interview, even phoning someone, that's a good description. But it's a bit confused with the more technical term of like agentic AI, where the AI is almost autonomous. Think more like a car, autonomous car. So on the former, great, rebrand, that technology is okay. Still risks, we just talked about them essentially, resume screening, etc. Real agentic AI, really give an AI a vague task, be a recruiter and see how well it does. I think still very early days. Potential's huge. And obviously the more agency we give to an AI, the more room for maneuver it has, then the more the risks are important. Quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why, even if these tools that claim they're fully agentic can actually work accurately and effectively, then the biggest blocker for their adoption is going to be the risks around it going wrong, right?
Yeah.
We all get very excited as a society about, or many of us, at least in the tech scene, of autonomous vehicles. Maybe 10 years ago, like the tech seemed to be pretty much there. Why not? And then I got into my first Waymo in another week in Texas, in Austin, which was cool. We're a long way still from, that was a long time ago, and still a long way from like full rollout. You know, that's kind of my view on the agentic stuff. It'll take a bit of time.
Yeah, but I think we mentioned this too, because I believe anyone selling quote unquote agentic anything in HR, you should just hang up the phone and leave, because there's just no VP or CHRO is going to allow an autonomous computer to make HR decisions about legal compliance and the core of your business, which is paying payroll every 2 weeks and keeping you out of legal trouble. That's what the core of HR is. And you can't, if you can't automate it, you certainly can't give it to somebody else to come up with an automation.
No, so not at this stage, maybe 20 years time or something.
But not right now. Not Unleash.
Right.
Unleash, where every booth said agentic on it. And I'm like, wow, this is kind of interesting, because I don't think they really even knew what agentic meant. Many people in the call may not, but I think the idea of agentic, or the concept of agentic, became synonymous with autonomous. So where it can think and reason and then make a choice. And that, I think, is what nobody in HR is going to buy right now.
Yeah. And that's very fair. I think I also think the techs, even though it's been promising developments and underlying technology, but it's still not there from like a ready to deploy level of quality. And even if it were, they're saying there's still how much can it really replace that person at this stage? I was going to say, it's just as with, I guess with any technology, it's just to always look through the marketing, and that might catch your attention, which is great, but make sure you really get into what actually is going on. Not even just the bias and all these risks we talked about, but is it even actually effective at what it claims it does? For me as a CHRO or whoever.
Very much. What's the problem first? Start with the problem, not the shiny box. Like, okay, we need to launch a division, or we need to do an hourly hire, our Q4 hiring. How can we use tools to make it faster? And instead of bringing on contract recruiters and RPO or whatever, is there other tools? Yes, there's plenty of them. Now, don't just look at the first shiny object. Now, once you understand your process, write your process, then go down and look for the tools that meet the process you want to solve for.
Absolutely. Solve the problem.
Awesome. Hey, I know we're up on time. I appreciate it, Jeff. And how can anyone find you and Warden?
Yeah, well, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out for me, Jeffrey Pohl. And online, we're at warden-ai.com.
All right. We'll add all that into the show notes too. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future, because we're just starting with this whole compliance thing and just ramping up. And by probably a couple months, we'll be seeing your name everywhere.